Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me at this pre-lunchtime webinar called Buying a Pre-Owned Electric Car. My name is Mal Skoran, and I will be delivering the webinar today. It seems like people are still trickling in, so I'll give them just a couple of minutes to do that. But in the meantime, if the folks that are already logged on would just indicate that they can hear me okay in the questions box, that would be great. Lovely. Thank you so much for everyone writing in. I found that when Green Energy Consumers Alliance transitioned to hosting its virtual events, it's always a good idea to do an audio check beforehand. So thank you for bearing with me for that tech check. So again, my name is Mal Skoran. I'm a program associate for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And today's webinar will be everything you need to know for buying a pre-owned electric car. Just a couple of logistics. Everyone is muted in order to avoid background noise. We'll have regular breaks for questions. Thank you so much to everyone that submitted a question when they were registering. That was really helpful. And I'm going to hope to answer most, if not all of those questions throughout the course of the webinar. But if I don't get to your question or if something pops up as you're watching, feel free to send that in the questions box. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared after the fact, as well as any additional resources that I mention that may come up as I'm answering questions or delivering the webinar. So with that, let's get started. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a nonprofit organization based in Providence and Boston, and our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. So we have been administering what's called the Drive Green program since the end of 2016. So we just passed our 4th birthday for the program. And the goal of that program is to try and make electric vehicles more accessible to consumers in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. You may have already heard this, but electric vehicles have a lower carbon footprint than their gasoline-powered counterparts. You can expect to lower your per mile carbon emissions by about 75% when you switch to an electric car compared to an average gasoline-powered car. And so for a long time, we've been working on how to make electric cars more accessible. And so for a lot of consumers, that means making that upfront cost as low as possible so that as many people can take advantage of all the benefits of going electric as possible. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk about pre-owned electric cars today because they make all the benefits of going electric really possible to achieve for a lot of drivers. So in this webinar, we will be covering all the benefits of buying a pre-owned EV. Some of those things overlap with the benefits of driving an electric car in general, and then others are specific to pre-owned buyers. Then we'll go into battery health and warranties. That's a concern that a lot of people have because the technology is new, and so you might not know exactly what kind of maintenance you'll need to think about, whether you can expect a battery to be in good condition when you're buying a pre-owned car, and just what will cover you if something does go wrong with the warranty. Then I will talk a little bit about popular cars that are commonly bought as pre-owned vehicles for people going electric. And then I'll go over some tips about how to buy a pre-owned EV. And I'll specifically highlight the things that are different from a traditional gasoline-powered car. And before I jump into that, I do want to say I am speaking from experience here. I bought a pre-owned 2017 Bolt in November of 2019, so just over a year ago. And so I have had the lived experience of actually going to the dealership and having to negotiate this. It was the first car I ever bought, and I've been extremely happy with it over the last year. So I'm hoping that the advice that I can give you today is as helpful for you as it was for me a year ago. So with that, let's dive right into the content. So as I mentioned, electric cars have a much lower per mile carbon footprint than gasoline-powered cars. But manufacturing emissions are a big part of the carbon footprint of any vehicle, gasoline-powered or electric. And in fact, electric vehicles have a slightly higher manufacturing carbon footprint just because of the additional energy it requires to produce a battery. And so when you're buying a pre-owned vehicle, those emissions are already accounted for. So you're not adding any additional cost in terms of carbon emissions when you're buying pre-owned because the vehicle has already been produced, that you're not bringing a new car into the world. And so in a lot of ways, buying a pre-owned electric car is the most environmentally conscious way to own a vehicle. And so when you compare a pre-owned electric car to a new gas-powered car, you can see an 84% reduction of climate warming emissions over the lifetime of the vehicle, which is pretty substantial. So not only are the environmental benefits really appealing, pre-owned electric cars give you a great car for a great price. On the screen there, I have three relatively comparable vehicles in terms of size. We have the 2020 Honda Civic, which is a gas-powered vehicle. Note, this is not the hybrid version. This is just the regular Honda Civic, which is pretty fuel efficient for a sedan. It gets about 33 miles to the gallon, which is good. Well, decent for a gas-powered car, I should say. And then we have that compared to a new 2020 Nissan LEAF Plus, which gets a driving range of about 222 miles per charge, and then a pre-owned 2017 Nissan LEAF. And so you can see both the new LEAF and the old LEAF win out in terms of fuel costs. The difference is not particularly great just in 2020 because gas prices are on the floor and electricity prices have remained relatively stable throughout the pandemic. But that's actually an asset to driving on electricity because the price of electricity is stable and you don't have to worry about changing your fuel costs over the years. Whereas that Honda Civic is going to be increasingly more expensive to fuel as there are global fluctuations in the oil market. And so you'll see that price to fuel the 2020 Honda Civic will change over time depending on what those fluctuations are. But the real benefit of the electric cars is that they're not really more expensive than the gas-powered vehicle. You can see that the new Nissan LEAF Plus is about what you would pay for a 2020 Honda Civic. But the 2017 Nissan LEAF, the pre-owned vehicle, you can get for half the price. So it's a great value for those that are willing to kind of take the jump and go for an electric car that's a little bit older. And it's also worth mentioning that electric cars have much better performance than gasoline-powered cars. They all have the smooth acceleration, quiet engine, instant torque, things that you used to have to pay a premium for in a gas-powered car. Those are all performance standards that are met standard in electric cars. So you really get a good bang for your buck. And yeah, I will mention that these two vehicles that I have listed here, the two Nissan Leafs, those are actual prices on the Drive Green EV shopping tool. So if you go to our website and you're looking at either a new Nissan Leaf Plus or a pre-owned 2017 Nissan Leaf, these are two actual vehicles that you can purchase. So if you are interested in that, I recommend checking it out after the webinar. So there was a report put out by Consumer Reports back in October that confirmed what Green Energy Consumers Alliance has been saying for a long time, which is electric cars on a lifetime basis are more cost effective to own than gas-powered cars because they're lower maintenance, they are cheaper to fuel, they require less repairs over the lifetime of the vehicle, and they're generally less trouble, and they're not as expensive as most people think. But we see that the savings that you get with an electric car actually improve with pre-owned vehicles. So the older a vehicle is, the more better off you are choosing an electric car rather than the gas guzzler. And that has to do with a couple things. So namely, when you're buying pre-owned, you don't see as high of an upfront cost with that purchase price. And so you get a better deal there. But also, as gasoline-powered cars age, they tend to have more serious engine problems that end up costing second and third-hand owners much more to repair, especially if the vehicle has over 100,000 miles or so. But with electric cars, you just don't see as high costs for those end-of-life repairs. And so the percent that you end up saving ends up being much more favorable for pre-owned buyers, though all electric car drivers are saving over the lifetime of their vehicle. So this is a unique benefit and something to keep in mind, especially if you want to go electric and you're not sure whether you want to go new or pre-owned. This is a pretty good case to go pre-owned if you're really thinking about that budget. And you can read the full report on the Consumer Reports website, which will be shared with you after the webinar. The really unique thing about pre-owned electric cars is that they can be a really good option for lots of different lifestyles and budgets, particularly because of a lot of early electric cars had limited range. They have really great specific use cases for example, a second car that maybe does only around the town driving. If you need that second car in order to, support your family and meet your transportation needs, it may make a lot of financial sense to make that second car a pre-owned electric car because you'll still have, your kind of heavy-duty car that you take for long road trips or that you take to kind of tow something, for example. But you can have that second car as a more cost-effective way to get around town. Pre-owned electric cars are also really good for folks that are retired or mostly stay local. It's particularly good for teenage drivers because the vehicles are really cheap to own. And so if you're looking for a vehicle for a young driver to start learning on, it's a great option. And limited range can actually be a bonus there as well. And then finally, it's a really good option for folks that are looking for a low cost of ownership and low maintenance costs, which is one of the reasons that I was really propelled to go electric for my first car. It just made financial sense for me. And it actually made financial sense for my roommate at the time as well, who was car shopping and test drove the 2017 Chevy Bolt along with me and ended up falling in love with the car as well. So it can be a great option for a lot of folks. And then finally, there are lots of other reasons to go electric as well. When you go all electric, you have zero noxious tailpipe emissions. So that's particulate matter or nitrogen oxides or sulfur oxides that tend to exacerbate asthma or other respiratory conditions. So you'll have better local air quality around you and your family. As I mentioned before, electric cars are renowned for their quiet and smooth rides. So you get a really great driving experience for pretty much no additional cost. And that's, no matter what electric vehicle model you end up purchasing. And then finally, a lot of drivers find that charging is more convenient than having to make regular detours to the gas station, especially if you're able to charge at home. So it can be a really great option for a lot of reasons. So next up, I will be speaking about battery health and the considerations there, but I'll just take a quick break for questions. Here's a good question. Are you saying electric cars are not good for a primary household vehicle? If so, why not? My biggest reservation is the uncertainty of recharging the battery on a long trip. Hence, hybrid cars are more attractive. Thank you for that question. I absolutely did not mean to imply that electric cars are not great for a primary vehicle. They absolutely can be, but it just depends on what you use the vehicle for. So I will speak for my own experience. I do not do a lot of driving at all. I mostly have been driving, even pre-pandemic. I mostly go to a local grocery store that I can get to by bike. It's just a couple miles away. And back when I was going into the office, I would bike there. And so I really bought the vehicle that I have because I'm a hiker. And I live in Rhode Island, and so I'll often do long road trips to New Hampshire or places where, you know, I can be driving 400 miles in a day. And so for me, and considering budget as well, you know, I'm a young first-time car buyer, and so the upfront cost is really the most important factor. Even though I knew that lifetime costs would end up being lower with an electric vehicle with a high range, I just didn't have the cash up front to be able to do that. And so a pre-owned plug-in hybrid met my needs perfectly, because when I do, you know, go around town and kind of use my car for trips that are, you know, 20 miles or something that I can't do by bike, it was really effective for me. I'd say pre-pandemic, about 80% of my miles were on electricity. And then the remaining 20% were those long trips that I was taking. And so a pre-owned all-electric car with only about 100-mile range, although it fit my budget, didn't really work for what I used the car for. If I were to stay more local, then a car with 100-mile range would have suited me absolutely fine, especially because of the amount of charging infrastructure that's around both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But again, it really depends on how often you take those trips and what the charging infrastructure is like where you're going. You can imagine if I'm leaving my car parked on the side of the road next to a mountain, charging infrastructure isn't quite great there. But if you're visiting family, for example, in Western Massachusetts and you're driving from Boston, then it's much easier to get a charge at your destination, and the 100-mile range would work for you. So it really depends on exactly what you're using the car for, where you're driving to, and what your budget is. But definitely electric cars can work for a large variety of people. And because I kind of went on a tangent with that anecdote, I don't think I'll be able to get to some of the other questions just yet, but thank you again for saving them or for sending them in. I will absolutely get to them, and a couple of them were about this next section that is coming up. So I'll just jump right to it. So as I mentioned earlier, electric cars are some of the lowest maintenance, low stress cars you can buy. A combustion engine vehicle has as many as 400 moving parts in its engine, and those are all things that can potentially go wrong. So you have spark plugs, timing belts, transmissions, fuel lines, air lines, everything that the car needs to make its engine operate. Those are things that end up giving vehicle drivers grief over time. Whereas if you have an electric car, it's really just a battery attached to a spinning magnet, and the more energy that's delivered from the battery, the faster the magnet spins, and that's attached directly to the wheels, and so more energy from the battery means you're driving faster. It's much simpler. It requires very few moving parts, and requires most importantly, very little maintenance over the lifetime of the vehicle. And so as this chart shows, maintenance costs and repair costs really vary depending on how old the vehicle is. As you can see, all electric vehicles start out pretty low cost to maintain. The combustion engine vehicles are a little bit more expensive even right out of the gate because of oil changes and other regular maintenance that you have to take the vehicle in for. But then, especially as the car ages, you can see that the electric vehicles, both battery electric and plug-in hybrid, start to creep up a little bit, just with repairs like, oh, maybe the air conditioning stops working, or kind of more mechanical things. Maybe you have to replace your tires, things like that. Whereas the cost of the maintenance and repair for the internal combustion engine really skyrockets, especially when you get to that 100,000 mile point on the odometer. And so over time, you see that electric vehicle drivers end up paying about half as much in lifetime maintenance and repair than the combustion engine driver. And so when you're buying pre-owned, you're probably inheriting a car that is at least 50,000 miles on it, but probably closer to some of the higher ranges that you see here. And so there's a big benefit and a big payoff when you're buying pre-owned to go for the electric vehicle. And noticeably, even the plug-in hybrids still see those savings because there's less wear and tear on the gas engine when you're driving part of your miles on electricity. So overall, even the plug-in hybrid, even though it does have a gas engine, it doesn't see as much need for repair in the long run. But there's a small catch here. The most important and most expensive component of the electric vehicle is the battery. That is what allows you to store energy that can propel the vehicle for years and years to come. I think most people have had an experience of having an old cell phone or laptop that loses charge really quickly. And so when you're thinking about a battery, it's easy to assume that an electric vehicle will have similar performance, that, in just a couple of years, it'll start to lose charge quickly or not perform as well. And to some extent, that is true. Range loss is a normal part of the aging process. It just is what happens to batteries as they age. But the range loss that you see with an electric vehicle is significantly less extreme than the performance or capacity loss that you've seen with other lithium-ion battery-powered devices. In part, that's because EV batteries are much larger, and so the chemistry going on inside the battery, it doesn't degrade as quickly when you have a bigger battery. But most importantly, EVs are designed for longevity. So they have really advanced thermal management systems to keep them at the right temperature all the time, and also battery management systems to make sure that the vehicle is in optimal performance all the time. So battery replacements are very rare, and they're usually covered by warranty, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the main thing to take away from this slide is that more miles driven does not necessarily mean faster capacity loss. Capacity loss is a function of lots of other factors, including, how much DC fast charging a vehicle has experienced, what kind of temperatures the vehicle was exposed to, and other kind of more circumstantial things. But just to put some numbers on it, because I think that can be helpful. The average range loss that we see in electric vehicles is about 2.3% of capacity lost every year. That rate is a little bit faster with some of the early vehicles that were released, specifically 2016 and before that, in part because the batteries were smaller, and so they see a little bit higher range loss. But also because these vehicles, the technology was still developing. And so the modern EVs that we see on the road today are sure to be have much longer battery life than what we see now. But for example, if we're looking at a Nissan LEAF after about 5 years, you can expect to see about 10% less range than when the vehicle was new. So if in 2015, the car was going 151 miles, in 2020, it would only be going 134. And it's worth noting that there's an early drop in range. So kind of like depreciation, that capacity fades a little bit faster at first, and then it slows down over a longer period of time. And just as a comparison for some newer vehicles, the 2017 Chevy Bolt, which lots of drivers are now buying pre-owned because lots of early adopters in 2017 decided to lease their vehicles. And so there's kind of a glut of these 2017 Chevy Bolts on the pre-owned market right now. We're seeing only about a 4% range loss in the 3, maybe 4 years that the car has been driven so far. So if the original range was 238 miles, it now probably will have a max of 229. But the important thing to note there is that the given range of a vehicle is still just an estimate, right? So you'll see slightly different performance depending on the weather, your driving style, whether you're driving mostly uphill or downhill, whether you're kind of slamming on the brakes a lot or whether you're coasting. All of those things will ultimately affect the range of your vehicle. And so if you're a driver, it's very unlikely that you would even notice a 4% difference over 4 years, just because of those other variations that can happen depending on the circumstances in which you're driving in. But the moral of the story here is that newer vehicles, 2017 and on, tend to be doing much better in terms of their rate of decline than older vehicles. And as someone in the Q&A pointed out, a lot of that has to do with how the batteries are cooled. Nissan LEAFs tend to be air-cooled, which is not as effective as liquid cooling for maintaining battery performance over time. But especially post-2017, we see the majority of electric vehicles having more advanced systems and therefore better performance over time. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about this, the source that I cite here, Geotab, has a really cool tool where you can actually look at specific vehicle models in years and then compare how much range they've lost over time based on the real driving data of over 6,000 drivers. Before I get to this section, I want to emphasize that battery replacements are extremely rare, but they do happen, and it's worth knowing that you are covered if there is some sort of factory issue in the manufacturing process of your battery. And so the warranties on electric vehicle batteries tend to be pretty generous, both because automakers want to make drivers feel confident that their vehicle will last over the long run, but also because they are just so rare that it's worth it for them to be able to offer this coverage because it doesn't happen very often. So as you can see, this coverage period is pretty standard. Most vehicles do either 8 years or 100,000 miles, whatever comes first. And the warranties basically work as a percentage guarantee. So if you lose more capacity in your battery than what is given in this table here, so for example, if you lose 40% of your battery capacity within the first 8 years that you're driving the vehicle, then they will replace the battery free of charge. And so that's basically to protect you from some sort of defect that would have caused the battery to perform not up to snuff as what they've tested and what they've deemed is kind of a more reasonable trajectory. But again, you know, over 8 years or 100,000 miles, it's unlikely that you would see more than 10% of your range lost, especially if you take good care of the vehicle and don't expose it to, you know, crazy hot temperatures and that kind of stuff. So this is really just to help you feel a little bit more secure, but not something that you'll likely have to worry about even as a person considering a pre-owned car. Great, so I hope that answered some of the questions that we had about maintenance and EV battery health, but let me see what else people are saying here. Okay, one person's asking if we have to change oil in an electric car. No, this goes back to how simple the electric vehicle powertrains are. There's no oil to change. There's no muffler that you will have to replace. There's no spark plug. There's no ignition cap, nothing that involves any type of combustion process is within an electric vehicle. If you own a plug-in hybrid, which has a gasoline powered engine in addition to the electric powertrain, then yes, you'll still have to change your oil because it still has those parts. But a fully electric vehicle doesn't have any of those maintenance concerns. And in fact, it's one of the reasons people report being really pleased with their decision to go electric, because you just don't have to do that regular maintenance. Someone's asking if I will address the intricacies of charging because they live in a rental unit and it's hard for them to charge. So that is a little out of the scope of today's webinar, but I did just deliver a webinar on Monday called Everything That You Need to Know in Order to Charge. So that would be a great place for you to answer some of those questions. And I can include a link to Monday's webinar in the follow-up for today. Here's another question. Do the cost savings on the chart factor in all the incentives and tax rebates available to new EV purchases? Yes, they do. So if you'll recall, I think it was the second or third slide that actually had some content on it. I had the upfront purchase prices of the 3 different vehicles on there. And so the Nissan LEAF, the new Nissan LEAF, that price included both the Drive Green discount that we make available through the program, the federal tax credit, which is $7,500 for the Nissan LEAF, and the Massachusetts state rebate, which is $1,500. So all of those incentives combined make the 2020 Nissan LEAF pretty comparable in terms of purchase price to the Honda Civic. And you can do all of those price comparisons on the Drive Green EV shopping portal as well. So one person noted that the information about battery life had to do with a time span of 8 years, and that lots of gas-powered cars last much longer than 8 years. And that's a really good point. So I want to clarify something there. So that is how long the warranty covers a factory defect with the battery. So that is, there was some kind of issue when the battery is being put together and it does not have the performance that you would expect of that battery. However, in the long run, lots of automakers are predicting that electric cars will actually outlast gasoline-powered cars. So you can expect a gasoline-powered car to run for, 150, maybe 200,000 miles, and until the cost of repairing it is just too expensive to really make it worth it. But with electric vehicles, there are fewer maintenance and repair costs throughout the life of the vehicle. And so it's unlikely that, you're going to have to suddenly scrap your EV because there's a serious issue with it. That we're not seeing that happening. What's more likely to happen is that especially as battery technology improves, both General Motors and Tesla have announced that they're really close to cracking the code on a battery that they expect to last 1 million miles. So if a battery is lasting 1 million miles, that will far outlast the physical vehicle. Like the car will probably start rusting and falling apart before the battery and the drivetrain have anything wrong with it. And so again, the 8 years for the warranty comparison is just like, that's how long you're covered for some kind of issue inherent to how the battery was put together. But you can expect the electric vehicle to last much longer than that. And, there is some recognition of the fact that the first mass market EV was introduced in 2011 or 2012. And so they've been on the road for less than 10 years. But with the testing that batteries undergo, automakers know exactly how long they can expect batteries to last because of the way they're put together. They're managed more by software than any other kind of combustion engine vehicle that is a totally mechanical device. And so it's quite different. It's like comparing a landline to a cell phone, it's just totally different, and what those two things can do are totally different. But yes, thank you for pointing that out. Are any of the manufacturers doing battery recycling? Because electric vehicles haven't been on the road for long enough to have them be scrapped, we're not seeing battery recycling take off just yet, because there's not a steady flow of used batteries that are ready to go to recycling. And there probably won't be for another 10 or 15 years or so. And here's why. After a battery is done being used inside of a vehicle, even if it has, let's say, 80% of its original capacity, that's still a lot of storage. And so what's more likely to happen with those batteries once the life of the car is over is that they're reused for some other stationary application. So either grid scale energy storage, or reused for, potentially storage for someone's home to pair with a solar installation, or some other application. Once the batteries are totally dead after that application, then we'll see recycling in order to recoup some of the valuable metals and materials inside the battery. But we're not going to see that for quite a long time. It's important that we get as much use out of the batteries as we can, so that it's less energy intensive, because recycling is quite an energy intensive process. But all of those reuse applications will help decrease the overall carbon footprint of the vehicle, its battery manufacturing, and it'll give us the most bang for our buck in terms of investment. And all of those markets are still developing. I'll just answer one more question before I move on. Thank you so much, everyone, for sending in these great questions. It seems like I can't get to them all in time, but here's a good one. Can you replace a battery with one with more range? So automakers aren't letting you do that yet. So for example, if you have a 2012 Nissan LEAF that originally could only go 80 miles or so, and you want to be able to take that battery and replace it with a newer, longer range one, I don't think that's available to do yet. But as we see more people getting into EVs, the market maturing, and just kind of better knowledgeability of how to make those transactions, I wouldn't rule it out. It's just not something you can really do yet. I think I've seen a few videos from, European mechanics who are doing that kind of service, but there are a lot more electric cars in Europe than there are in the United States, at least on a per capita basis. And so we might see that at some point in the future. And that's actually a great transition to this next section because the electric vehicle market in North America is still quite small. Electric cars make up just 2% of all the new cars sold in the US, which means that if you're looking to buy pre-owned, there just aren't too many. That is certainly different if you live in a place like Massachusetts or California even, where there have been incentives to help stimulate the new car market for a long time, but it can really vary depending on where you live and how hot the market is. And I will say, because there is a limited number of pre-owned electric cars that are available, they tend to sell really quickly. When I bought my 2017 Bolt, it had appeared online, I think, in a day, one morning, and I was checking, I happened to see it. I went into the dealership that day, bought the car. My roommate, who I had mentioned, test drove with me, bought the car that day. And so, you know, 2 cars basically off the lot in a day. They, you know, people that are invested in going for that pre-owned electric vehicle because of its environmental benefits, its cost savings, they tend to jump on it quickly. And so while there is a good number of these vehicles available, there are just as many very excited buyers as well. So it's important to kind of know what you're looking for and get in quickly. And this graph helps explain that phenomenon a lot, because especially in this first 4-year section between 2011 and 2014, there were very few cars being sold. They're inexpensive now on the pre-owned market, but they're low range and they can be kind of hard to find. So you won't necessarily get great value from the cars in this area, even if you can find one. Between 2015 and 2016, there were more sales. Battery technology improved quite a bit. And so you get certainly a better value when you buy pre-owned cars in this range, but they can still be a little hard to find just because they're relatively inexpensive and they're mid-range, so they will go quickly. And then finally, in this last time bracket, we have from 2017 to 2019. Those are the electric vehicles that are pre-owned that are the priciest. They haven't been on the road for very long, and they have the most advanced, up-to-date battery technology. So this is where the market is really maturing. Sales are starting to take off. And so you have a lot of good options, but they just are a little bit more expensive. And so as you are considering buying a pre-owned electric car, it's worth kind of figuring out what is the range and the budget that you have, so that you can kind of focus in on the types of vehicles that make most sense for you. And the Nissan LEAF is one of the most popular cars to buy pre-owned in the electric car market, just because they've been produced for so long. The Nissan LEAF is the first mass market electric car to enter the market in 2012. And at that point, it can only get 84 miles on a charge. So at this point, the battery health has degraded quite a bit for a lot of them because of that early technology. But you can really get a good value on these vehicles if you're only planning on doing around the town driving. Or again, if you have one of those special use cases that make sense with this kind of limited range and you want to buy a car as cheaply as possible. As we move along the timeline, you'll see the prices of the pre-owned vehicles really vary, as do the range. And so as you're shopping, it's important to pay attention not just to the model that you're interested in, but also the year, because if you know, for example, that you want at least 100 miles of range, it'll make a difference if you buy a 2015 Leaf versus a 2016 Leaf. And there'll be a difference in price as well. So you might want to go for that cheaper car, but you have to think about what that range would be as well. And so then as we kind of move along to 2018 and 2019 and 2020, we see that the range has expanded dramatically, and that buying a pre-owned electric car, the prices tend to increase because the cars haven't been on the road for very long, and they have that much higher range. At this point, you probably could get a better deal on a brand new 2020 Nissan LEAF with all of the incentives that are available to buy new. So the Massachusetts state rebate, the drive green discount, and the federal tax credit, and that'll come out to less than buying, the exact same car from a year ago pre-owned. So again, if you are looking at some of these higher range vehicles, it's worth doing the cost comparison to see if buying new just makes more sense. In addition to the Nissan LEAF, there are a couple of other really popular cars to buy pre-owned. They're all electric. Skipped ahead there. The first is the 2016-2017 BMW i3, which if you're trying to buy a car on a budget, the first model that you think about isn't necessarily a BMW, but lots of people really love the i3, and it has a really cool option on it, which is it gets about 80 all-electric miles if you're buying this 2016-2017 model year. But then it has a really small backup gas tank that you can use if, you just need a little bit extra juice to get you where you're needing to go or to get you to the next charging station. And so it can be a really cool option. It's almost like a plug-in hybrid, but it's considered a battery electric vehicle because that additional gas backup is just an option, but it's something to think about. Another really popular car is the 2016-2017 Volkswagen e-Golf. It is basically a recreation of the Volkswagen Golf that has been really popular, but it's all electric. And we do see a significant change in range depending on whether you buy 2016 or 2017. So take that into account, and that's what will affect that average price as well. And then finally, the 2017 Chevy Bolt. It's just entering the pre-owned market. I happen to know anecdotally that lots of folks who used the Drive Green program to buy a Chevy Bolt in 2017 decided to, or not to buy a 2017 Bolt, but to lease one. They traded in their leased vehicle to buy a new 2020 Bolt. So there was an increase in these cars available on the market. And so you can get them at a pretty good price. And it has kind of like the standard range that you expect of modern electric vehicles. 239 miles on electricity should support you for a lot of your driving. And the technology will only get better from there. So there was a question earlier about, having some anxiety of taking an electric car on longer road trips, and maybe a hybrid makes more sense. And driving a plug-in hybrid is really the best of both worlds, and I can tell you that from experience, because you get all of the benefits of driving on electricity, especially if you're just taking short trips, but then you do have a full gas tank to support you. The car that I own, a 2017 Chevy Bolt, gets about 50 miles on electricity, and then it has that full gas tank. And you can, there's a pretty good variety in terms of price. So you get a great deal on these Chevy Bolts because they're discontinued. And so that decreased the selling value quite a bit. But it is a great market for pre-owned buyers. I get this question a lot as to whether I have any trouble finding a place to service these vehicles. And the answer is no, because the gas engine is the same as, any other vehicle. It's basically just a regular hybrid that has that plug. And so I haven't had an issue, and I don't know of anyone that has reported an issue with this car as well. They're extremely reliable. I've had low costs over the last year, and I'm not driving very much these days, but it's served me well. Two other popular cars that you might want to consider are the Toyota plug-in hybrids. The Prius Prime is the most recent model. Came out in 2017, and that's probably what you'll see on the pre-owned market largely. And it actually gets fewer miles on electricity than the Chevy Bolt. But it tends to be more expensive, in part because the Toyota Prius is a pretty established vehicle. People trust Toyota vehicles, and so they're valued a little bit more. But you can still get a great car for the price as well. And then if you're okay with having a little bit less range, and you're willing to commit to plugging in often, then the 2012 to 2015 Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid is a good option. It's the predecessor to the Prius Prime. It has significantly less range, and you can get them at a lower price. So it's an option to consider as well. So we are nearing close to the end here, and I'll try to finish this up quickly so I can answer the last couple of questions because we have only 10 minutes left. But as you're shopping, here are some tips that I would recommend. The first, which is something that you should do with any pre-owned vehicle, is to take a long test drive. This is an opportunity not just to get a feel for the car, but also to kind of check out what the battery's health is like. I recommend calling ahead to the dealership and making sure that the vehicle is charged before you arrive there, because that can be important, especially if, again, I appeared on the showroom lot just a day after the vehicle had been shipped there. So if you are getting in quickly, make sure that vehicle is charged. It's a good opportunity on that test drive to see how the battery is holding up as you're driving in a variety of conditions. And so you want to test it both at highway speeds and slow speeds, and also account for the fact that when it's colder outside, you probably won't see as much range. So if you're seeing a big dip in range, that's the weather, especially these days in New England. You'll want to inspect the usual mechanical components, so making sure that all the climate controls work and the audio, and that the braking and steering are all fine. Anything that you might do with a traditional gas-powered vehicle, I should say. There was one question someone submitted before the webinar, which was how can you get a mechanic to inspect an electric vehicle if there just aren't very many mechanics that specialize in electric vehicles. And so the answer to that is if you're interested in getting an inspection with a fully electric vehicle, again, there aren't as many parts to inspect. It's really just the battery. There's a way to test the battery for its health, basically. And the way that you want to do that is if you buy a certified pre-owned vehicle, then that testing will have already been done. And it'll confirm that the health of the vehicle is about what you would expect for its age and mileage. So buying certified pre-owned is a good proxy for having a mechanic inspect the vehicle, which again, is a kind of traditional bare bones piece of advice that a lot of pre-owned car buyers get. But because electric cars and internal combustion engine cars are so different mechanically, the only thing you have to worry about is the battery, and buying certified pre-owned will help you make sure that it's good. And then finally, the last piece of advice that I would give is to do your homework about electric cars before you get to the dealership. Most car salesmen are still kind of not quite caught up on the uptake when it comes to selling electric vehicles. And so to the extent that, you can figure out your charging situation, that you compare different vehicles, that you do your own online research, that'll serve you a lot more than talking to a car salesman who may or may not know the ins and outs of electric vehicles. An anecdote I hear a lot is that folks that buy electric cars often get, notices about oil changes from the dealership because the dealership just automatically sends them and doesn't think twice about it. So definitely do your homework as much as possible before you go in. And the Drive Green website on Green Energy Consumers Alliance website will help you answer those questions. And so again, this is our electric car shopping portal where you'll be able to explore the prices of both new and pre-owned vehicles. We don't have discounts on pre-owned vehicles like we do new vehicles, but we do have a good selection of pre-owned cars in the area that you can get from more reputable dealerships that have EV sales staff and can do a better job of asking your questions or answering your questions than you would experience at some other used car sales facility. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and we have a couple of minutes for some final questions. So I will try to get to them as much as possible. Does fast charging put more stress on the battery? Yes, it does. So the majority of EV drivers find that charging at home or at work is the most convenient, just because of the amount of time that cars spend parked in one place. So that's how most EV drivers are charging their vehicles. But studies have shown that fast charging just introduces more stress into the battery because of the high heat and management involved in managing that high voltage and high current to be able to charge quickly. So you really don't have to worry about it if you're just doing it occasionally. But if you are fast charging every day, that is not the best way to be kind to your battery. I don't know of anyone that really does that, at least not non-Tesla owners. Tesla cars are a little bit different just because they have more enhanced battery management, and so they can handle more fast charging. But for the most part, it's not something you want to do every day, even for a Tesla vehicle. There's one question here that says on the Drive Green portal, the typical final price for a car like the Bolt is only $2,000 different between a brand new or a pre-owned option. Why not just go new? So you can just go new. I mean, the amount of incentives that are available make it quite easy to go new if that is something you want to do. But one thing that I had to take into account when I was doing my car shopping is just kind of like cash on hand. So for folks that maybe don't want to wait for the tax credit to come back to them the following year, because that's how the federal tax incentive works, is it's a credit that you apply for when you're filing your income taxes. And so you get that money back the year after you buy the car. And so for folks where upfront cost is really the main concern, you might not want to buy new and have to wait for that money to come back for you. So that's one option. But lots of people just prefer to buy pre-owned cars. The Bolt is a unique option. But for example, with my car, the 2017 Volt, I couldn't buy it new because it had been discontinued. And so that was just one thing I had to consider. And I think actually I might have misspoke. So just to clarify, the Chevy Bolt and all Chevy vehicles are not eligible for the federal tax credit because they've reached the limit on the program. But the discounts offered through the Drive Green program are so good that it makes up for that and allows the Bolt to compete. But just to clarify, that incentive program is not available for the Chevy. Oh, this is an interesting point. Thank you for bringing this up. A 2 to 4-year-old car has depreciated a lot, so the Massachusetts excise car tax will be a lot lower. yeah, so that's another great reason that someone might choose to buy pre-owned as well, is you just pay lower taxes on it. Thank you for bringing that up. Doesn't the dealership have a way to test battery health? I've heard of purchases where the battery was not good. Yeah, so that's part of the reason that buying certified pre-owned will help you avoid that. You absolutely can ask for a battery health report. It's basically as simple as plugging a little diagnostic doodad into the car to kind of get that information, and they should be able to help you with that. But again, it depends where you're buying the car from. So if you're buying certified pre-owned from a Chevy dealership that sells, or I shouldn't just say Chevy, sorry about that. If you're buying a certified pre-owned car from a dealership that also sells new cars, you'll probably have an easier time with that. I bought my car from a used car emporium, which had a lot of different makes and models and didn't specialize in just one. And so that was a little trickier. So I decided to buy certified pre-owned. But yes, you can absolutely ask for that report. And I will just answer one last question before we end off here. I don't see any information about the Hyundai Kona. This seems to be a very well-reviewed EV. Any thoughts? Yes. So the Hyundai Kona just came out, I think, in 2019, and it has been very well received by folks that have decided to buy it. So well received, in fact, that we're not really seeing anyone trading in their Kona for another vehicle. So there just aren't very many on the pre-owned market yet. But depending on whether you are actively car shopping now, or if you're just kind of learning about your options for potentially replacing a gas-powered car in the next couple of years, the market is going to change dramatically year to year. And so even in, 2 years from now, you'll have a lot more options because there will be a lot more new EVs coming back onto the pre-owned market. And so it's still developing. It's kind of, I'd say the pre-owned market is 3 to 4 years behind the new market, which is growing quickly, but still quite small. And so, as you're comparing pre-owned and new, you want to kind of assess what vehicles are the best value for you, and what you're ultimately willing to pay for that upfront cost. But yes, lots of new great vehicles coming out that are, I think, going to be very popular on the pre-owned market once they get there. And on that note, I'm going to end Q&A there. Thank you so much, everyone, for actively participating and sending in really thoughtful questions. I appreciate it, and I wish you all the best of luck for your car shopping process, whether it's happening now or in a couple of years from now. And best wishes to you and your families for this holiday season as well. So thanks again for joining me, and I hope to see you at another webinar again soon.